So welcome everyone who's listening to episode 29 of the Strong as Steel podcast, the podcast from United Steelworkers District 3. I'm Scott Lunny. I use pronouns he and him, and I am the district director for United Steelworkers District 3. And we are recording this on the traditional unceded territory of Coast Salish people, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, here in the District 3 office in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. And today we have a great guest and I think a bit of a topical topic, if I can say that, which is to talk a little bit about the steel sector in our union and in Canada, some of the challenges facing that sector, and I think also just some of the other sectors that we have that are impacted by trade and other goings on in the world these days, which there are a lot of. And so to do that, we have our esteemed assistant to the Canadian National Director, Meg Gingrich. So Meg, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great. Where are you at? You look like you're not in your office anyway.
No, I am. I'm in my office. This is my office. Oh, that's your office? Oh, okay. At the Canadian National Office.
Oh, okay. Great. So we're recording this in early April. So just coming up, we're having the Stand Up for Steel event with our steel sector locals. So maybe, Meg, you could tell us a little bit about what's planned for Stand Up for Steel.
Absolutely. So we have our Stand Up for Steel meeting and lobby day coming up next week. It will have happened at the time that people are hearing this, but it'll be the week of April 20th. So on April 22nd, we'll have a one-day conference where we're bringing in folks from steel locals from across Canada, so from across all three districts, to talk about issues affecting the sector, kind of a 1 year, we'll have an analysis of 1 year of tariffs by the United States on steel from Canada, but then also to talk about the measures that we've taken as a country to protect our steel sector. And we really want to look forward to the future of the Canadian steel industry, steel sector, and steel jobs. So it's not going to be all negative sort of thinking about tariffs. We want to talk about the impact of them, but also talk about what we can do as a country to make sure that we're protecting and expanding our own steel sector. So lobbying around several central demands that will take up the second day. The first day we'll meet with locals, we'll hear from locals, we'll have some presentations, talk about, we'll have a lobby training, those types of things. And then on the second day, all the folks from the different steel locals, as well as several directors and other other members of the leadership team will be going out and lobbying with MPs, key bureaucrats, and so on. And so we're really looking forward to it. Our members have been extremely engaged, obviously, for a long time, but especially over the last year since the tariffs were announced on products from Canada. So we think it'll be a good event. We'll have about 50 people there. Again, we have a pretty broad representation from across the country.
That's great. Yeah. And so we have in District 3, just for listeners and folks who might not know, we have basic steel operations or steel mills in Selkirk, Manitoba, local 5442, which is Gerdau, and then in Regina and in Calgary that are now Interpro Pipe and Steel operations, and Alta Steel in Edmonton. Because a lot of people think the steel sector is mostly in Ontario and Quebec, which it is, and our locals in District 3 haven't had a lot of challenges recently with the tariffs. Thankfully, actually, Interpro and Regina's kind of ramped a little bit back up because of some orders and stuff. But there's been some impacts in the East, Meg, and I know certainly in District 5 and District 6. I think that have made the news. Certainly Algoma and some of the stuff in Quebec has made the news. Like, what's been the impact on our locals and our members in particular of the tariffs?
Yeah, so the impact of the tariffs, I will say, we've seen a slowdown in some places, temporary layoffs. Like you said, primarily in Ontario and Quebec, probably about 1,500 to 2,000 permanent layoffs, although I would say that a lot of them now are at Algoma, which, the tariff situation certainly played a role in accelerating those, but those were as much due to the switch to the electric arc furnace, which is less labor intensive. So to some extent, we were expecting those layoffs and doing all we could to, prevent as many as we could to get people trained and to make them whole if they were laid off and so on, and to provide other training opportunities. But certainly the situation there, where they're heavily dependent on exports to the United States, didn't help the situation and made it quite difficult for them. So again, we're sort of holding steady. It's been tough, as you can imagine, in the workplaces, the parts of the steel sector that are more dependent on exporting to the United States, where they haven't been able to sort of switch production and selling into Canada. So it's not great, but I will say we're sort of holding steady. Like you said, Western Canada has done a little bit better. And we're really hoping that, some of the measures that we're going to be lobbying for next week in Ottawa and things that we've already achieved in terms of sort of protecting our domestic industry, stopping unfairly imported products into our markets and so on, will actually help us build the steel industry of the future. And we will be able to protect our Canadian steel sector. We sort of have this threat hanging over us. We've seen some negative effects, but we're really trying to turn this into something where we collectively see as a country the importance of the steel sector to the domestic economy and the industrial economy and the jobs it provides, and then putting the policies in place to make sure that we maintain that in the future.
And really, like if folks aren't in the steel sector, or don't, follow the stuff that closely, having a steel sector is important, not just to Canada. It's important to like most countries. I know like there's a challenge in a lot of countries around the world around maintaining their steel sector. There's overcapacity globally. I was reading somewhere that it's, 600 million tons or something of overcapacity in 2025. But, there's real problems for developing an industrial economy if you don't have a domestic steel sector. Right? I guess I don't know if that's a question, but it's it's like there's an importance. It's not just about it is about jobs and stuff like that, but there's an importance to the steel sector, in the economy beyond just the jobs and the revenue that it generates for the producers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always say that what Marty Warren, our national director's favorite line is, what is a nation without a steel industry? And it's true. I mean, it's so much of the steel that we produce or that a country produces will go into other parts of the industrial economy. So it does form the backbone of that. And I think, we really do see it to be very important to tie, having our own and a strong domestic steel industry to our sovereignty. And it's true that other countries also sort of see their steel industries in the same way. So that does, as you can imagine, presents problems globally because there's a lot of competition, a lot of production, overproduction, like you said, excess capacity in global markets. And so that's why you really need to take, or a country needs to take a concerted effort to protect its domestic industry. In this case, in Canada, we need to make sure that we're not, what we produce here in Canada isn't easily undercut by cheap imports. China, in particular, produces so much steel, I think that could essentially serve the entire global market. But we don't want to be reliant on China. We don't want to be reliant on the U.S. or, solely on exporting to the U.S. And so we really are trying to focus on protecting our domestic industry and increasing consumption domestically through procurement by Canadian, those types of measures.
And so one of the things that we've been doing as a union in many sectors, but certainly in the steel sector, is bringing our locals together, through Stand Up for Steel, and the locals regularly do Zoom calls and come together. And, we've been doing that in District 3 in the mining sector, and we do that in the wood sector, and we do that in a number of, in healthcare. There's a healthcare council and, nuclear council and all that kind of stuff in our union. But the other thing that we do, not just in the steel sector, because I know there's been trade cases in mattresses and transformers that we've been involved in District 3. But our locals in District 3 certainly, and I know the District 6 and District 5 have been involved in a number of trade cases. And I know, Meg, that's one of your files too that you have in addition to looking after Marty, is the trade cases. And have those been effective in helping to protect our industries in Canada and in particular the steel sector?
Yes. I mean, I should know the numbers off the top of my head in terms of the number of various orders, and a very large percentage of them are on steel products. So we've been participating in trade cases for probably about a decade now. It's something we've been able to do even longer in the United States. And we've really, inserted ourselves as a trade union into ensuring that when the trade tribunal is looking at whether or not a product coming in is hurting the domestic industry, that they're taking the workers, the impact on workers into consideration. And so we have a lot of members who've gone to Ottawa and testified and talked about, the impact of whatever, product it may be. And we're typically very successful at getting orders against, the products that are often from Vietnam or China, India, Turkey, a whole host of countries. And so those are very helpful. And I would say that they're complementary to sort of the broader overarching measures that we have and continue to advocate for. So, broader tariffs or identifying steel that's melted in port in China, where there would be sort of a blanket measure on some of that steel. And so the trade cases they go after a very particular product. So they're kind of, I would say, complementary to the sort of larger trade policy measures that we advocate for and have sort of, we've been able to achieve. So that's something that we continue to participate in. It really provides an excellent chance for our members to go and directly talk about the impact of unfairly traded goods on their work, on their communities, and so on. And that's been extremely important. And I think it's been extremely important in ensuring that we're winning most of those cases. And so that's something we'll continue to do at our Stand Up for Steel meeting and lobby day next week. We'll hear from the lawyers who we work with very closely to talk about some of the trade reforms that we've been able to achieve, as well as sort of the overarching impact of us participating in those.
Yeah, I know just the local folks that have in District 3 that have participated in those trade cases have really, they feel good about the fact that they're able to do that. They feel really good about the fact that the unions, doing that work and allowing them to participate in, a lot, and also a little bit independent of the employers because we're doing it as a union, and also it gets some of them to dress up for a change. Like, I know that's the only time they put on a collared shirt and pants sometimes. Actually, I don't mean they don't wear pants. They wear, some of
Shorts.
Those guys just wear shorts, yeah, even though they live in Saskatchewan or Alberta. But so I know that's been a really valuable thing that we've done in steel in particular, but also, like I said, I know in District 3 we've been involved in at least a mattress one and a couple transformer cases where we're trying to protect our domestic industry. Steel it's a little bit different when we're talking about steel and aluminum to lumber, which we know a lot about in the West, which we're really we're the overproducer, I guess, in some ways, although I don't think we're overproducing, but we're primarily an exporter of lumber, and we really need to find export markets, and there's not a lot of work to be done in the domestic market for lumber because we far outproduce we don't really import a lot of lumber. But in steel, there's really a lot of opportunity for us to use more Canadian steel in Canada. That I know there's some measures by the federal government around procurement. Are those effective? And I certainly know from the West there's some challenges that are presented by construction folks and others about how big our country is and how much easier it is for them to import products from Asian countries in particular, and what they really mean is cheaper, but easier to import from Asian countries than it is to transport across, our vast country. But is that going to be an effective thing for the steel industry procurement? Like I think it is, but I'm just a Vancouver guy. I know more about the lumber sector and mining than I do about steel.
Yeah. So, I mean, there have been some announcements in the last year on Buy Canada. And I'll say that that's something that our union has pushed for a very long time. But with the trade actions by the U.S. on Canada, that was something that we really kicked into high gear. And, there had always been fear that, does it violate the WTO rules and all those kinds of things? And at this point, we just realized, as the steelworkers have been saying for many, many years, that we need a domestic steel industry, and in a sense, who cares about the WTO? I don't know that wasn't always a popular position, but I think many have come around to it. You have to care a little bit.
Pretty a mainstream position, I think, right now in the world, right? Because I'm not sure, certainly the U.S. isn't listening to the WTO anymore.
No, so. And when they do it, and they're of course much more powerful than most countries, so they can kind of do what they want. But in Canada, has been fairly reliant on these sort of international rules and so on, and you don't want to veer too far from them. But at the same time, as we've argued, the steel industry is sufficiently important to our domestic sovereignty that we need to protect it and we need to expand it. So in terms of the effectiveness of Buy Canada policies, it's hard to say so far. I mean, I think they really have only started to come into force. We need to be really careful about not having too many loopholes, and we hope to see at provincial levels similar types of procurement. And I know that, like you said, that has been an issue, in particular in Western Canada, where affordability is often a concern, and those things are pitted against one another. But I think those types of policies, Buy Canadian procurement policies, the importance of them to increasing domestic demand. In the last year, we've seen not only a decrease in exports from Canada to the U.S., perhaps obviously, we've seen a bit of a decline in domestic demand. And so to bolster that, we do need policies like this. And ideally, this is one of the things that we're calling for next week at our steel lobby, is the development of a steel industrial strategy. And so, connecting, if we're prioritizing the steel industry, that would include things like procurement policies by Canada, but then also connecting them to larger economic goals, around affordability. And that might require some state intervention support, those types of things, to make sure that, we're not saying do this on the one hand and then it makes projects so expensive that no one will actually have any projects because they can't afford them. And so kind of tying that all together is really important. But I think that there is a ton of potential in terms of, we hear about these nation building projects. We need a nation building strategy that kind of, or that's a part of it, because if we're not using products that are produced in Canada and we're just importing from abroad, then we're really losing out on a key way of actually making sure that we protect our steel industry and our industrial economy more broadly.
Yeah, and we need, I certainly think we need a broad industrial strategy, but we also need, like you said, Meg, sector strategies, because, there are other essential sectors to our economy. I think, wood products and lumber being one. I think auto certainly being one, not so much in the West, but in the East, and and we really do need to, have strategies for each of those sectors, as well as a comprehensive sort of national strategy, and not be certainly not be pitting those sectors against each other when it comes to trade and other things, which sort of leads me to CUSMA, or the Americans would say USMCA, but we would say CUSMA, or Canada, U.S., Mexico trade agreement that is, I think almost being negotiated right now. I don't know. That's sort of a little bit under the radar, but it is certainly up for discussions later this year. And I know. I know we have a position as steelworkers, and we actually were put out a statement with Unifor about trade, and talked a little bit about CUSMA. Are we I don't know, I'm not super optimistic, but that's just me. Are we collectively optimistic that some of this will get resolved with discussions with the U.S. and Mexico over CUSMA, or do we think, we're just going to try to hang on to as much as we can out of those negotiations? I know that's a big question, but
yeah, well, no, and it's so hard to say. I also am not super optimistic, but we're dealing with the Trump administration, and they're so irrational, and it's hard. It's sort of impossible to know what they're really going to do. Although I think it is clear that they are not going to move away from, these Section 232 tariffs on steel and other products. Like, I think that is clearly a priority for the Trump administration to maintain those and expand those. And Canada has some leverage. I think the fear, I think, on our end of it, where we do have some control over this, is that Canada will sell out a sector for another sector. So right. I think, as a union, we've been really pushing for comprehensive. We don't want to sell out the auto sector or sell out the softwood lumber sector. I mean, that's something that we failed at as a country in previous rounds of negotiations, and so we need to
because we've
sure
never had free trade in lumber. Like, there's never lumber has never been in the free trade agreements, and there's not in my lifetime been free trade in lumber with the United States. There's always been some sort of set duty or whatever, and there's other sectors like that too, where there's always been quotas and always been tariffs, and then just free trade in stuff that nobody cares about, but that aren't as high profile political issues in the U.S. really is what the crux of it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's been managed trade in certain sectors for a long time. I think, if you look at softwood, and you're probably more of an expert on this than I am, but like you said, there's been decades of duties on softwood, and there's internal domestic political reasons for that, I think, more than anything else. And so I don't think we will move away from sort of a move more into managed trade. And I think that could be okay. But we need to be sure that in Canada, we're identifying what we think is strategic for Canadian economic sovereignty. And so, of course, I keep talking about steel, but that's quite clearly, a main part of that. But I think also where we need to look at natural resources and the sort of classic Canadian conundrum of having, being resource rich, but not always valuing, the value added manufacturing and ensuring that we are doing that here in Canada and signing off on trade agreements that just sort of facilitate the export of those raw materials. And so I think that's where we need to be very careful that we're not, again, selling out one sector for another. The U.S. is highly dependent on aluminum from Canada. I think there's some fear that the U.S. will. We thought maybe they would have caved already a little bit more than they have on that, but I think that there's still some fear that they may try to strike a deal on aluminum, but then we don't get anything from that. And so that's what we're really pushing for.
Or potash, right? Or critical, like potash right now, the Trump all of a sudden realized that, you need potash to grow stuff, and he's put food. Tariffs on fertilizer and potash, and the farmers can't afford it. And, we've got leverage there. We've got leverage, maybe in energy, and we've got leverage in critical minerals, and maybe not so much in steel and auto as we would like to have. And I think it's right. It seems to me that mostly the unions, because I think Unifor is saying the same thing as we are, which is don't sell out one sector for another. We got to look at this across the whole economy, whole Canadian economy, and protect the strategic sectors that are important to protect while trying to get free trade as much as we can in as many areas as possible, right? And so, which I guess is a big task. I was listening to another podcast that had Bob Ray on it, who was commenting on, and in his comment was the best thing for CUSMA negotiations is that Trump and the White House aren't really paying attention to it right now. And so the more you can have the lawyers and the technocrats talking about CUSMA, probably the better off it's going to be for Canada and Mexico and the U.S., quite frankly, to get a deal because it's going to be less influenced by the unpredictability and the I suppose politics of the president. But we probably can't count on that forever, that he's not going to pay attention to CUSMA, but he seems distracted by other things right now. So that might be a good thing. I know I don't want to keep you too long, Meg, but just maybe one or two sort of last things. Do you think that there's more stuff we need to be doing around trade and these issues, with locals and with the membership? I mean, I think we as a union have been really active and really, quite vocal on both sides of the border about the Trump tariffs and things like that. But is there stuff that locals could be doing, or members, do you think, that could be doing that would, help us sort of try to resolve some of the uncertainty around these things?
Well, I think I'll go back to steel and steel locals sort of as a model for it, because I think we've for many years, even before all the tariffs over the last year, have, I think, engaged our steel locals quite well. And they've been doing the trade cases. They've been speaking out on issues related to trade, and they've been on the front lines. And even, when we get media requests, often it's folks from the local who will go and speak. And so I think that, if we could expand that where we meet fairly regularly, and I know that you mentioned some other sector councils, whether they're ad hoc or sort of more official, but having those types of things, those types of initiatives are really important to ensure that our members are engaged and that we're hearing from them and they have a chance to speak out. And I would say that, when various politicians or, high-level bureaucrats and those types of people hear from our members, that is so powerful, and probably certainly more powerful than hearing from someone like me. But when they can actually talk about the impact
or me,
on the
not
ground.
just you.
Yeah, but
I say that all the time. Like they expect me and you and Marty to come and say what we're going to say, but it has way more impact when it comes from somebody who actually works in an industry and comes out of an operation, whether it's steel or otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the more we can do that and create conditions where locals are able to do that, that's helpful. We'll see. I think that next week with our steel lobby day will be really powerful as well, because it's local union members going and talking to people about the impact of tariffs and how they want Canada to protect the steel industry and grow the steel industry in the future. And that'll be so much more powerful than, again, hearing from us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, every time we've been doing, lobbying in Western Canada, even in the various legislatures, it's, you have to keep at it. You have to it's not a one and done kind of a thing. But where we've seen progress, it's always because we've been able to bring members and from whatever sector. I mean, we were just lobbying about forestry in BC, and we're actually, we're seeing some movement finally on some of the things that we've been talking about, a working forest and increasing the harvest. But that's to the credit of the locals and the members who showed up and went in that case to Victoria and talked to everyone, opposition, government, ministers, not just the forest minister, but all the rest of them, to say, like, this is something that needs to happen, right? And so I think that's important that we're doing that, and really glad that we do the Stand Up for Steel stuff. And I know our Western District 3 locals out of the steel industry will be there, and they'll be excited and all dressed up and and ready to make some progress. So. I really want to appreciate you coming on, Meg. We'll kind of wrap it up, and I'll let you say anything else you want to say just before we close it out. And I really mean that I thank you, because I kind of tricked you and told you there'd be a bunch of other people on this on this episode, and it wouldn't just be you, and it ended up being just you. So I really appreciate that. I know how busy you are, and thank you for taking the time. And I don't know, is there anything else you wanted to say before we close it out?
Not really, just to say thanks for having me and giving me a chance to talk about some of these major issues. I know I focus a lot on steel. Obviously, that's important for us as the steelworkers, and we'll continue on that fight. But more broadly on trade, on CUSMA, this is not going to be a short fight. This is going to be a long-term thing. And so we'll keep at it, and we want to see our members engaged on this as well. And so thanks for having me and letting me talk about this.
Thanks, Meg. And really appreciate all that we do. And, folks should know that there's a in District 3, there's a staff that supports all the stuff we do. And there's a staff in the Canadian National Office that work with Meg that have been phenomenal. They are all the time on bargaining and all the things that legal and the things they support us with, but certainly on the trade file. And we've had nothing but support, whether it's softwood lumber or steel or the work that we're doing in the telecom sector. We've had nothing but support from the Canadian National Office, and so the members in District 3 should know that we have a really a strong staff in our national office, as well as a great staff in the district office. The district staff is great too. Even better maybe, but the national staff is great, and they really support us in District 3. So I want to say thanks for that as well, Meg. And I think this is your second time you've been on the podcast now.
Yes, I think I was on about a year ago.
I think we tricked you to get on. Tricked you on that time too. We just brought you and Marty in from the airport straight into the and just said, "Here you go, you're on the podcast." So yeah, I might be burning my political capital with Meg. She's not going to believe what I have to say anymore. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to wrap it up. This has been episode 29 of the Strongest Steel podcast. I think a great discussion with Meg Gingrich, the assistant to the Canadian National Director, about the steel sector, Stand Up for Steel, trade, CUSMA, and I want to thank you all for listening. Please share it around to other steelworkers or other folks that might be interested, and follow us on all of the podcast streaming things. It's the Strongest Steel podcast, and if you have want other information, you can find it at usw.ca/District 3. And if you got any questions or want to reach out to us, you can get us at d3comms@usw.ca. So thanks again for listening to the Strongest Steel podcast, and we'll see you next time.